They called her a spinster, a failure, too old at 35 to ever matter. But when a Danish prince sees past society's cruel judgment to the woman beneath, the healer, the fighter, the soul who chose purpose over convention, their impossible love will prove that the right person arrives exactly when you're finally ready. If you have ever been at a point where someone wrote you off, then you had to come back and surprise them. This story is for you.
Hello everyone! Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, like the video and share with loved ones, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin.
Miss Joyce Rutherford stood near the silent auction tables in the grand ballroom of Boston's Hotel Vendôme. Her modest gray silk gown, a stark contrast to the elaborate Worth creations swirling around her. At 35 years old, she hadn't planned to attend this charity gala at all. These events were exhausting performances of wealth and social positioning. But Dr. Harrison Blackwell, director of Boston Children's Hospital, had personally requested her presence to represent the nursing sisters who worked tirelessly in the children's wards. Merciful heavens, is that Joyce? The voice sliced through the polished air with surgical precision. Joyce didn't need to turn around. She would recognize her younger sister Rebecca's tone anywhere. That particular mixture of horrified delight that had haunted family gatherings for years. "Still without prospects, I see," Rebecca declared, materializing at Joyce's elbow in a magnificent peacock blue gown that had undoubtedly cost more than Joyce earned in 6 months. Her husband, Kenneth Sutherland, a prominent banker, trailed behind with their usual retinue of fashionable acquaintances. "You know, sister dear, there's a reason society considers a woman firmly on the shelf by 30. At your age, it borders on the pitiable." Kenneth at least possessed the grace to appear uncomfortable. "Rebecca, perhaps this is neither the time nor—" "Nonsense, Kenneth, someone must speak plainly to her." Rebecca adjusted her fan with practiced elegance. "Look at you, Joyce, still wearing those dreadful serviceable gowns that smell of carbolic soap in sick rooms. Is it any wonder no gentleman of quality has shown the slightest interest? 35 years old and not so much as a serious caller. Mama is utterly mortified." Joyce felt the familiar sting, but maintained her composure with the same discipline she employed when dealing with difficult physicians. "The dreadful smell you reference, Rebecca, is the scent of honest work, something you might not recognize beneath all that French perfume. Honest work does not secure a husband or a respectable position in society," Rebecca countered, her voice rising just enough to draw curious glances from nearby guests. "You are a family embarrassment, Joyce, an aging spinster nurse, spending her days with other people's sickly children while her own youth withers away. Father had to endure questions, but you just last week at his club. Whatever became of the elder Miss Rutherford?" they asked. What could he possibly say? Before Joyce could formulate a response that wouldn't cause a scene, a palpable shift in the room's atmosphere commanded everyone's attention. Conversation dropped to hushed whispers and the rustle of silk as ladies craned their necks toward the grand entrance. "His Royal Highness, Prince Richard Eriksson of Denmark," the butler announced, his voice resonating through the suddenly silent ballroom. Joyce had seen engravings in the illustrated papers, of course, but no engraving could capture the presence of the man now standing in the doorway. Prince Richard was tall and distinguished, with fair hair and striking features characteristic of Scandinavian nobility. His formal evening attire was impeccably tailored, his bearing that particular combination of authority and refinement that came from a lifetime of royal privilege. He appeared to be in his late 30s, and his intelligent blue-gray eyes surveyed the assembled company with an expression Joyce recognized from her work. polite attention masking profound weariness. "Now that is what a proper gentleman looks like," Rebecca breathed, clutching her husband's arm while staring unabashedly at the prince. "They say his mother, Queen Ingrid, is desperate for him to marry. The Danish succession requires an heir, you know. Every eligible lady in Europe has been paraded before him for years." Joyce observed as Boston's social elite surged toward the prince like a glittering tide. Ambitious mothers thrust their daughters forward. Society matrons angled for introductions. Wealthy merchants' wives positioned themselves strategically. Prince Richard maintained an expression of courteous interest, but Joyce, whose profession required reading the subtle cues of patients too young or too ill to articulate their distress, noticed something others missed: the tension in his shoulders, the mechanical quality of his smile. He looked like a man drowning in propriety. The following afternoon at precisely 3 o'clock, a royal carriage appeared outside Joyce's modest boarding house in the South End, causing such a commotion that Mrs. Henderson, her landlady, nearly fainted into the parlor furniture. "A prince, Miss Rutherford! An actual prince calling on you!" Mrs. Henderson fussed with the antimacassars and tea service with trembling hands. "I've never in all my years— Oh, what will the neighbors say?" Joyce smoothed her simple day dress, her heart hammering against her ribs. Last night in the conservatory had felt like a dream. Surely in the cold light of day, Prince Richard would realize the absurdity of pursuing an acquaintance with a 35-year-old spinster nurse. Yet here he was, emerging from his carriage with a bouquet of white roses, looking decidedly out of place on her shabby street, but completely unconcerned about it. Their first proper conversation unfolded in Mrs. Henderson's overstuffed parlor, the landlady hovering nearby as an impromptu chaperone. But what should have been awkward became extraordinary. Richard asked about her patients, not with polite detachment, but with genuine curiosity. He wanted to know about treatment protocols, about the challenges of caring for children from poor families, about her frustrations with physicians who dismissed nurses' observations. "You speak of them as colleagues," Joyce observed, surprised. "Most people assume nurses simply follow orders." "Most people are fools," Richard replied simply. "In Denmark, we're beginning to recognize that healing requires collaboration, not hierarchy. My mother, Queen Ingrid, she believes the future of medicine lies in respecting all who serve." They talked for 2 hours, then 3. Mrs. Henderson eventually retreated, scandalized but secretly delighted. When Richard finally stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. "Miss Rutherford, Joyce, I know this is highly irregular. I return to Copenhagen in 2 days, but I would very much like to see you again before I leave. Tomorrow, perhaps. Might you permit me to visit you at the hospital? I should like to see your work." No suitor had ever asked to see her work. No suitor had ever existed at all. "Yes," she whispered, "I would like that very much." The next day, Prince Richard arrived at Boston Children's Hospital, causing absolute chaos among the staff. But he ignored the flustered administrators and followed Joyce directly to the children's ward. She watched nervously as he met young Lily Chen, who was still fighting consumption. She expected him to recoil from the sick child, to maintain royal distance. Instead, Richard knelt beside Lily's bed, speaking to her in gentle tones, asking about her favorite stories. When Lily shyly showed him the drawing she'd made, he studied it with genuine interest, praising the flowers she'd sketched from memory. "She reminds me of my younger sister at that age," he told Joyce quietly as they walked through the ward before the scarlet fever took her. And suddenly Joyce understood the shadow she'd seen in his eyes at the gala, the weariness that came not from privilege, but from loss. They ended up in the hospital's small garden, a quiet space where recovering children could take fresh air. It was there, surrounded by the scent of late-blooming roses and the distant sounds of the city, that Richard took her hand. "I must return to Copenhagen tomorrow," he said. "But Joyce, this is madness, I know. We've known each other barely 2 days, but I cannot remember the last time I felt truly seen by another person, truly understood." "I feel it too," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "But you're a prince. I'm a—" "You're remarkable," he interrupted, "and I'm going to write to you. Every week, if you'll permit it." Before she could answer, he leaned down and kissed her, gentle, brief, but unmistakably real. When he pulled away, his eyes were bright with something that looked like hope. "Say yes, Joyce. Say you'll wait for my letters. Say this isn't ending." Through tears she didn't know she was crying, she whispered, "Yes." The first letter arrived exactly 1 week after Richard's departure, delivered by special courier in an envelope bearing the Danish royal seal. Mrs. Henderson nearly collapsed with excitement, summoning Joyce from her shift at the hospital with breathless urgency. "My dearest Joyce, Copenhagen feels impossibly far from Boston tonight. I find myself wondering what you're doing at this very moment. Tending to young Lily, perhaps, or reading to the children in the evening ward. I miss our conversations more than I thought possible after such brief acquaintance." Joyce read the letter 3 times before carefully folding it and placing it in the drawer of her writing desk. That evening, by lamplight, she composed her response, telling him about Lily's improving color, about little Thomas Wright's fever finally breaking, about the new surgical equipment the gala had funded. The letters became a lifeline. Every week without fail, Richard's correspondence arrived, sometimes brief notes written hastily between state obligations, sometimes lengthy reflections on his frustrations with royal protocol, his mother's health initiatives, his growing conviction that their connection was not mere chance, but something far more significant. Joyce's responses were equally honest. She wrote about her patients' victories and losses, about the harsh realities of nursing that polite society preferred to ignore, about her own doubts and fears. She told him things she'd never told anyone, about the loneliness of her choices, about the sting of Rebecca's constant criticism, about her terror that at 35, she'd built a meaningful life but missed the chance for love. "You haven't missed anything," Richard wrote back. "You've been preparing, becoming the woman I needed to find." But not everyone celebrated their transatlantic courtship. In Copenhagen, Richard faced increasing pressure from advisors who considered the aged American nurse wholly unsuitable for Danish royalty. Court officials whispered about her common birth, her advanced age, her utter unsuitability for producing heirs. In Boston, the whispers were equally vicious. Rebecca appeared at Joyce's boarding house multiple times, each visit more hysterical than the last. "He's toying with you," Rebecca hissed during one particularly ugly confrontation. "Princes don't marry spinster nurses, Joyce. They have their amusements. Then they marry appropriate women. You're making our entire family a laughingstock." But Joyce had Richard's letters arriving faithfully every Thursday. She had his words promising that distance changed nothing, that society's expectations mattered less than what they'd found together. Then, in December, 4 months into their correspondence, a package arrived. Inside, wrapped in velvet, Joyce found a leather-bound journal filled with medical sketches and notes. Danish children's health protocols, treatment innovations, research findings. On the first page, Richard had written, "For the work we'll do together, because your purpose is not separate from us. It's the foundation of everything I love about you. If you've ever been told that you're too late for love, too old to matter, or that your purpose makes you unsuitable, stay with us. Subscribe now because Joyce's story is about to get even more impossible. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin when society says they should never start at all. Joyce held the journal against her chest, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, she understood something profound. Richard didn't love her despite her work. He loved her because of it. He didn't see her age as a limitation. He saw the wisdom and strength those 35 years had forged. That same week, a second letter arrived. This one was brief, written in Richard's own hand rather than his secretary's formal script. Come to Copenhagen. Let me show you what we could build together. Let me introduce you to my mother. Let me prove this is real. Say yes, my darling, say yes. Joyce stared at the letter, her hands trembling. Copenhagen, Queen Ingrid, the Danish court, everything terrifying and impossible. And yet, she reached for her pen and wrote a single word. Yes, the transatlantic voyage aboard the SS Germanic took 11 days. 11 days for Joyce's courage to slowly dissolve into absolute terror. She stood at the ship's railing, watching gray waves crash against the hull, and questioned every decision that had led to this moment. What was she doing? A 35-year-old American nurse sailing across the ocean to meet a queen, to enter a world so far removed from her own that they might as well exist on different planets. Rebecca's parting words echoed in her mind. You're going to humiliate yourself, and when he sends you back, don't expect sympathy from anyone. The other passengers whispered about her. She had overheard the speculation. That's the American nurse Prince Richard has taken an interest in. Can you imagine, at her age, the Queen will never approve? Joyce spent her evenings in her modest cabin, rereading Richard's letters, clinging to his words like lifelines. You are not coming to audition for anyone's approval. You are coming because I cannot bear another day without seeing your face. But as the ship approached Copenhagen's harbor on a gray January morning, Joyce's hands trembled so badly she could barely fasten her coat buttons. The Danish capital materialized through the mist like something from a fairy tale. Spires and copper roofs, elegant buildings lining the waterfront, and there in the distance the imposing presence of Amalienborg Palace. Joyce's breath caught in her throat. Richard waited at the dock, flanked by royal guards and officials, looking every inch the prince he was. For a terrifying moment, Joyce wondered if she'd imagined their connection, if the man who'd written those intimate letters could truly be the same imposing figure standing on the quay. Then he smiled, that same genuine smile from the conservatory, the one that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. Joyce, he breathed, taking both her hands in his as she descended the gangplank, propriety be damned. You're here, you're actually here. I'm terrified, she admitted quietly. I know, he said, squeezing her hands, but you're also the bravest person I've ever met. You're about to meet my mother, and I won't lie, she's formidable. But Joyce, she already knows about your work, about who you are. She's curious. The carriage ride to Amalienborg Palace passed in a blur. Joyce barely registered the elegant streets, the curious onlookers, the grandeur of the city. Her mind spun with imagined disasters. Queen Ingrid dismissing her as unsuitable, the court laughing at Richard's peculiar American infatuation, herself exposed as the imposter she felt like. Amalienborg Palace loomed before them, its classical facade both beautiful and intimidating. Servants in royal livery lined the entrance. Everything gleamed with centuries of wealth and power. Richard, Joyce whispered as they approached the grand doors, I don't belong here. I don't know the protocols, the proper forms of address, how to— "You belong wherever you choose to stand," he interrupted firmly. "And right now I need you standing beside me." They entered a receiving room so opulent Joyce wanted to weep. Gilded furniture, priceless paintings, chandeliers that probably cost more than the entire Boston Children's Hospital. A lady-in-waiting announced their arrival, and Joyce prepared herself for the formal interrogation she had been dreading. Then Queen Ingrid entered. She was smaller than Joyce expected, elegant in a deep purple gown, her silver hair arranged in elaborate braids. Her eyes, the same blue-gray as Richard's, assessed Joyce with an intensity that felt like being examined under a physician's lens. Joyce executed her carefully practiced curtsy, her heart hammering so violently she thought everyone must hear it. "Your Majesty," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thank you for receiving me. I'm deeply honored." "Enough of that," Queen Ingrid interrupted, her English accented but clear. "I did not invite you here for pretty speeches, Miss Rutherford." She glanced at Richard. "Leave us. I wish to speak with her alone." Joyce saw panic flash across Richard's face. "Mother, perhaps." "Alone, Richard." He squeezed Joyce's hand once, a brief gesture of support, then reluctantly withdrew, leaving Joyce alone with the Queen of Denmark. The silence stretched impossibly long. Queen Ingrid circled Joyce slowly, studying her the way one might evaluate a painting or a sculpture. Finally, she spoke. "The formal receiving room is tiresome. Come, we will walk into the gardens." And just like that, Queen Ingrid swept toward the terrace doors, leaving Joyce no choice but to follow, her terror reaching new, impossible heights. The palace gardens in January were stark and beautiful. Bare trees etched against gray sky, frost clinging to dormant rose bushes, gravel paths crunching beneath their feet. Queen Ingrid walked with purposeful strides, her silence more unnerving than any interrogation. Finally, she stopped beside a frozen fountain, turning to face Joyce directly. "Tell me about your work," she commanded. Not a request, a royal order. Joyce's mind raced. She could sanitize it, make it palatable, speak of nursing in the abstract terms that polite society preferred. But Richard's letters had taught her something. Authenticity mattered more than performance. "I care for children who are dying," Joyce said quietly. "Children whose parents cannot afford proper medical treatment. Children society would rather not acknowledge exist. I hold them when they're frightened. I fight physicians who dismiss their pain because they're poor or foreign-born. I watch them suffer, and sometimes, not often enough, I watch them heal. It's brutal work. It breaks my heart regularly, and I cannot imagine doing anything else." Queen Ingrid's expression remained unreadable. "My son writes that you are 35 years old, unmarried, that you chose this work over securing a husband." "I didn't choose work over marriage, Your Majesty," Joyce replied, finding her courage. "I simply refused to abandon my purpose for the sake of convention. If that made me unmarriageable, then so be it. And now my son offers you everything you supposedly rejected: marriage, position, security. Rather convenient, wouldn't you say?" The accusation stung, but Joyce held the Queen's gaze. "If I wanted position and security, I could have married any number of respectable Boston merchants years ago. I didn't cross an ocean for a crown, Your Majesty. I came because your son sees me, truly sees me, in a way no one else ever has. And I see him the same way, not as a prince, as a person." Something flickered in Queen Ingrid's eyes. "You love him." "I do," Joyce whispered. "God help me, I do." The Queen turned away, staring at the frozen fountain. When she spoke again, Her voice had changed, softened with a pain that transcended royalty. "I had 4 children," she said quietly. "Richard, his 2 sisters, and a son named Frederick, my youngest. He was 6 years old when the scarlet fever came." Her hands trembled slightly. "The best physicians in Denmark attended him. We had every advantage, every resource, and still I held him while he burned with fever, while he struggled to breathe, while he—" She stopped, composing herself. "While he died in my arms." Joyce's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry, Your Majesty." After Frederick's death, I could have retreated into grief. Instead, I dedicated myself to ensuring no other mother would lose a child to preventable disease if I could help it. I established health initiatives, funded research, fought my own court to redirect resources toward children's hospitals. She turned back to Joyce, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "So when my son tells me he's found a woman who has devoted her entire life to saving children, who understands what it means to serve from the heart rather than obligation, I do not see an unsuitable American nurse, Miss Rutherford. I see someone who already comprehends what it means to be royal in the only way that truly matters." Joyce couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face. Queen Ingrid stepped forward and took Joyce's hands in her own, a gesture so unexpected, so intimate, that Joyce nearly gasped. "My son needs someone who understands that crowns and titles are privileges that demand service, not accessories that confer superiority," the Queen said firmly. "He needs someone who will love him for who he is, not what he represents. Someone who already knows what it means to dedicate oneself to something larger than personal ambition." "Your Majesty, I—" "Thank you," Queen Ingrid interrupted, her voice breaking slightly, "for loving my son for the right reasons. Thank you for being exactly who you are." She pulled Joyce into an embrace, a queen hugging a common-born nurse in a frozen garden, and whispered, "Welcome to our family, my dear. Welcome home." Joyce returned to Boston 3 weeks later, with Queen Ingrid's blessing and an unofficial understanding that she and Richard would marry. The court announcement would come later, after proper protocols were observed. But among those who mattered, the decision was made. Boston society exploded with speculation. Joyce found herself suddenly visible in ways she'd never experienced. Whispered about in shops, stared at in church, discussed in every fashionable drawing room, from Beacon Hill to the Back Bay. Some reactions were curious, even supportive, but others were vicious. Rebecca appeared at the hospital one afternoon, her face flushed with fury and embarrassment. "Do you have any idea what people are saying?" she hissed, cornering Joyce in the nurse's station. "That my sister, my spinster sister, has somehow ensnared a prince? They're laughing at our entire family, Joyce. Father can barely show his face at his club." "Then perhaps father should find better company," Joyce replied calmly, continuing to organize medical supplies. "This isn't a joke. You're making us all look ridiculous. A 35-year-old nurse marrying royalty. It's unnatural." It's love, Rebecca," Joyce interrupted quietly. "Something you might not recognize." Rebecca's face contorted with rage before she stormed out, but her words planted seeds of doubt. Was Joyce being selfish? Was her happiness coming at her family's expense? Then, 2 months after her return from Copenhagen, the real scandal erupted. A London society paper, the Illustrated Social Register, published a full-page article that made Rebecca's complaints seem gentle by comparison. The headline alone made Joyce's hands shake. "Prince Richard's peculiar choice. Is the aged American nurse suitable for Danish royalty?" The piece was accompanied by cruel caricatures. Joyce depicted as a haggard old woman in a nurse's uniform, hunched and unattractive, contrasted with illustrations of beautiful young European aristocrats Richard could have chosen. The article speculated openly about her ability to provide heirs, questioned her breeding, mocked her common birth and advanced age. While Prince Richard's charitable inclinations are admirable, the article sneered, one must question the wisdom of elevating a 35-year-old American nurse, however dedicated to her work, to the position of Danish princess. The court whispers suggest Her Majesty Queen Ingrid has been persuaded against her better judgment. One can only imagine the inevitable scandal when this ill-advised match produces no heirs, leaving the succession in crisis. Within days, Boston papers reprinted the article. Suddenly, Joyce couldn't walk down the street without recognizing the stares, the whispers, the barely concealed mockery. Reporters appeared at the hospital, demanding statements. Society matrons who'd never acknowledged her existence now openly discussed her unsuitability at charity events. Dr. Blackwell called her into his office, his expression pained. Miss Rutherford, Joyce, the hospital board is receiving complaints. Donors are threatening to withdraw support. They say your situation reflects poorly on the institution's reputation. Joyce sat in her boarding house that evening, surrounded by newspapers featuring her name, her face, her entire life dissected for public entertainment. Mrs. Henderson had stopped making eye contact. Her fellow nurses whispered when she passed. She pulled out writing paper, her hands trembling, but her decision crystallizing with painful clarity. My dearest Richard, I cannot do this to you. I cannot let my presence damage your reputation, your mother's initiatives, or Denmark's succession. Society is right. I am unsuitable. I am too old, too common, too much a source of scandal. I release you from any obligation. Please forgive me for not being strong enough to withstand what loving you requires. I will always treasure what we had. Joyce, she sealed the letter before courage failed her, addressed it to Amalienborg Palace, and handed it to Mrs. Henderson for posting. Then she wept. If you've ever been torn down by people who should celebrate you, who've made you question your own worth, don't look away now. Subscribe to see how Joyce fights back. Because this story is about to prove that real love doesn't crumble under scandal. It becomes unbreakable. 4 days after posting the letter, Joyce had begun the painful process of dismantling her dreams. She'd written her resignation letter to Dr. Blackwell, packed her few belongings, and made arrangements to leave Boston entirely. Perhaps travel west, find a small town where no one knew about Danish princes or social scandals, start over in anonymous obscurity. It was past midnight when the pounding began. Joyce startled awake, her heart racing. The knocking continued, urgent, demanding, completely inappropriate for the late hour. She heard Mrs. Henderson's frightened voice, then heavy footsteps on the stairs. Miss Rutherford, Mrs. Henderson called through the door, her voice shaking. That is, Prince Richard is here. He's dripping wet and demanding. Joyce threw open the door, barely registering Mrs. Henderson's shocked expression, because there he was, Richard, soaked through from rain she hadn't even realized was falling, his formal coat dark with water, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked old, desperate, and absolutely furious. You thought I wouldn't come, he demanded, pushing past her into the small room. Water dripped from his coat onto the worn carpet. You thought I would receive that letter and just accept it? Let you walk away? Richard, you're soaking. I don't care. His voice cracked with emotion. I received your letter 3 days ago. I was on a steamship within hours. Do you have any idea? He stopped, struggling for composure. Do you truly believe I care what some scandal sheet prints? Do you imagine I would trade a lifetime with you for society's approval? It's not just one paper, Joyce whispered, tears streaming down her face. It's everywhere. The speculation about heirs, about my age, about my unsuitability. You are not unsuitable. Richard's shout made Mrs. Henderson scurry away from where she'd been eavesdropping. He pulled a waterlogged envelope from his coat pocket. Do you know what this is? It's a letter I sent to the Illustrated Social Register's editor, written on royal stationery, threatening legal action. He unfolded the damp paper, his hands shaking, and read, Miss Rutherford has dedicated her life to serving the most vulnerable among us. If your publication considers selfless compassion and unwavering dedication to be unsuitable qualities in a princess, then perhaps your publication should examine what values it truly represents. Richard, I'm not finished. He pulled out more papers, telegrams, letters. This is from Florence Nightingale herself, defending you publicly. This one's from the Women's Medical Association of London. Here's one from Harvard Medical School's dean. Your scandal, Joyce, it sparked international debate about women's worth beyond youth and beauty. Prominent feminists are writing editorials about you. Medical professionals are defending you in journals across Europe and America. Joyce stared at the papers, unable to process what he was saying. Richard dropped to his knees in her modest boarding house room, water pooling around him, and took her hands. You are not a scandal, my darling. You are a revolution, and I cannot face this world without you beside me. But the succession, the heirs, Denmark has survived for 1,000 years. It will survive regardless of whether we have children. And if we do, they will be raised by a mother who understands that true nobility comes from service, not bloodline. His voice softened. But even if we have no children, even if society never accepts us, even if we face scandal for the rest of our lives, I choose you. Every single time, I choose you. I'm so afraid, Joyce sobbed. Then be afraid, Richard said fiercely, pulling her close despite his soaking clothes. Be terrified, be uncertain, but don't be alone. Whatever comes, we face it together. Do you understand it? Together. Joyce collapsed against him, both of them kneeling on the floor of her tiny room, and finally, she stopped running from the impossible thing that had found her. Together, she whispered. Say you won't leave me, he pleaded. I won't leave you, I promise. Never again. Spring arrived in Copenhagen with unexpected warmth, transforming the city into something magical. Cherry blossoms lined the streets, and the harbor sparkled under clear blue skies. Joyce had returned to Denmark 6 weeks after Richard's rain-soaked appearance in Boston, and this time she came not as a terrified visitor, but as someone who had chosen her path with absolute certainty. The scandal hadn't disappeared, it had simply stopped mattering. Richard was right. The international response had shifted the conversation entirely. Women across Europe and America had embraced Joyce as a symbol, proof that purpose and dedication held value beyond youth and conventional beauty. But today wasn't about scandal or them. Today was about the opening of a new pediatric ward at Copenhagen's Rigshospitalet, a project Joyce and Richard had spent months planning together through their letters, refined during her weeks in Denmark. The public ceremony was exhausting. Dignitaries, press photographers, endless speeches praising the royal family's generosity. Joyce stood beside Richard in a proper gown that felt like a costume, smiling until her face ached. shaking hands with officials whose names she'd never remember. Finally, blessedly, it ended. The crowd dispersed, the photographers packed their equipment, and the hospital settled into its normal rhythms. "Come," Richard said quietly, taking her hand. "There's one more room I want to show you." He led her through quiet corridors to a wing she hadn't seen before. When he opened the door, Joyce's breath caught. The room was unlike anything in the rest of the hospital. Soft afternoon light streamed through large windows overlooking a carefully tended garden. The walls were painted in gentle colors, pale yellow, soft green. Comfortable chairs sat beside each bed, positioned so families could keep vigil without exhaustion. There were shelves with books, toises, art supplies. Everything spoke of comfort, dignity, peace. This is the room for terminally ill children, Richard said quietly. For the ones we cannot save. I designed it based on everything you told me about what dying children need. Not just medical care, but humanity. Space for their families to grieve. Beauty to ease their final days. Joyce walked slowly through the room, touching the soft blankets, the thoughtful details. Tears streamed down her face. Every element came from your letters, Richard continued. The windows positioned to catch morning light, the chairs that convert to beds so parents can sleep nearby, the garden view. This room exists because of you, Joyce, because you taught me that caring for dying children with dignity matters as much as saving those we can. She turned to find him kneeling beside one of the small beds, and suddenly she understood this wasn't just a tour of a hospital room. Richard withdrew a small velvet box from his coat pocket, opening it to reveal a sapphire ring that caught the afternoon light. Deep blue, surrounded by small diamonds, clearly an heirloom of significant importance. "This was my grandmother's," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She wore it for 57 years of marriage to a man who loved her not for her title, but for her fierce heart and unwavering principles." He looked up at Joyce, his eyes bright with tears. "I initially admired your kindness, but I have come to love your strength, your unwavering purpose, and the way you have taught me what it means to serve with authenticity rather than obligation." Joyce sank to her knees before him, both of them kneeling on the floor of this room they'd created together. "You were not late, my darling," Richard whispered. "You were becoming. You were building yourself into this extraordinary woman, this force of nature, this person I cannot imagine living without. And I would wait another 35 years if that is what it took to find you." "Yes," Joyce sobbed, before he could even ask the question. "Yes, Richard, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as though his grandmother had known somehow that it would eventually belong to an American nurse who chose purpose over convention. "You are exactly on time," Richard said, pulling her into his arms. "Our time." Outside, through the windows, Joyce could see children playing in the garden, healthy children, healing children, living children who existed because people had cared enough to fight for them. And she finally understood. She hadn't been waiting too long. She'd been preparing to meet this moment as her whole, complete self. Copenhagen's marble church had never witnessed a wedding quite like this one. European royalty filled the front pews, kings, queens, princes, and princesses in their formal regalia. Danish nobility occupied the middle sections, their expressions ranging from genuine warmth to barely concealed disapproval. And in the back, funded by Richard's personal insistence, sat a contingent of nurses from a Boston children's hospital, many weeping openly before the ceremony even began. The traditional royal protocol proceeded flawlessly. The processional, the religious readings, the formal exchange of rings. Joyce moved through it in a daze, overwhelmed by the grandeur, the weight of the sapphire ring on her finger, the reality that she was actually marrying a prince. Then came the moment for personal vows. Richard turned not just to Joyce, but to the entire assembled congregation. The church fell absolutely silent. I stand before you today to marry a woman society told me I should not choose, he declared, his voice carrying to the furthest corners of the marble sanctuary. She is 35 years old, too old, they said. She is common born, too low, they said. She works with her hands, too undignified, they said. Joyce saw several nobilities shift uncomfortably. She saw Richard's advisors pale. But I say this, Richard continued, his voice strengthening. Miss Joyce Rutherford has more nobility in one day of service than many possess in lifetimes of inherited titles. She has more grace in her compassion than can be found in any royal court, and she has more true worth than all the young, titled, suitable ladies combined. He turned to Joyce, his voice softening, tears streaming down his face. You were told you were too late, but my darling, you were right on time. Our time. Joyce's hands trembled. This was the moment for traditional vows, for demure acceptance, for playing the role of grateful bride. But Richard's honesty demanded her own. She turned to face the congregation, all those people who had judged her, mocked her, declared her unsuitable. I spent years being told I had missed my chance, she said, her voice steadier than she expected. That my value had expired, that choosing purpose over marriage had condemned me to worthlessness. But I was not late. I was preparing. I was becoming. And when love arrived, I was ready not as someone desperate to be chosen, but as someone who knew her own worth. The Boston nurses were openly sobbing now. Even some of the Danish nobility wiped their eyes. To every woman who has been told she is too old, too independent, too dedicated to her purpose, Joyce continued, her voice rising with passion. You are not too late. You are not worthless. You are not wrong for choosing differently. You are right on time. The church erupted in unprecedented applause, shocking, improper, absolutely forbidden in royal ceremonies. But no one stopped it. The nurses stood, clapping through their tears, then others joined. First tentatively, then with growing enthusiasm. Even Queen Ingrid was applauding, tears streaming down her regal face. 2 years later, Princess Joyce stood in the gardens of the newly completed Joyce Erickson Children's Hospital in Boston. She still worked as a nurse 3 days each week in Copenhagen, scandalizing traditionalists but inspiring thousands of women across Europe who saw her as proof that marriage didn't require abandoning purpose. Rebecca approached hesitantly, her elaborate gown and jewelry unable to mask the pain in her eyes. Might we speak privately? Rebecca asked quietly. In one of the hospital's quiet rooms, Rebecca finally broke. Kenneth has taken a mistress, she admitted through tears. My marriage, my perfect, respectable marriage, is crumbling. And I realized I built my entire life on society's approval, on appearances, on everything you rejected. You were right all along, Joyce. You chose purpose over performance, and you ended up with both love and meaning, while I have neither. Joyce embraced her sister, truly embraced her, without resentment or triumph. It's never too late to choose differently, Rebecca. Never. At the dedication ceremony, young Lily Chen, now 17, healthy, and training to become a nurse herself, presented Joyce with flowers before the assembled crowd. Princess Joyce married the prince because she has the kindest heart in Boston, Lily declared, her voice clear and strong. But the prince married her because he was smart enough to know that kindness is worth more than anything else. As Joyce and Richard stood together watching children play in the hospital's garden, children who would live because people had fought for them, he took her hand and whispered, "Still happy you said yes?" She squeezed his hand, looking at everything they'd built together: the hospital, the lives saved, the women inspired, the proof that authentic love values character over convention. Every single day, Joyce smiled, every single day. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt too late, too old, too wrong for choosing your own path, subscribe now, because stories like Joyce's remind us that the right love arrives exactly when we're finally ready to receive it. Don't miss what comes next.
If you enjoyed this story, we appreciate you a whole lot and look forward to connecting with you as we build a community on this channel. Every day, we will put out more stories, so we need your support. Help us by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel if you haven't already. You won't miss any new exciting videos. Check out the next video. You'll love it!